how can it be that victims who are brave enough to raise an allegation are the ones who pay often the ultimate career price? Defence has a systemic sexual violence problem, and unless there are significant reforms, that problem will continue and people will remain at risk.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is the Morning Edition. I'm Bevan Shields, the editor of the Herald, filling in for Sam Salinger-Morris. Many of you will remember a powerful 2013 video of the then Australian Army Chief David Morrison ripping into soldiers who denigrated women, saying there was no place for them in the military.
On all operations, female soldiers and officers have proven themselves worthy of the best traditions of the Australian Army. They are vital to us maintaining our capability now and into the future. If that does not suit you, then get out.
But today, after another set of allegations of rape in the ADF have been revealed, we wonder if anything has really changed. Today, investigative reporter Nick McKenzie, who broke the story for our mastheads and 60 Minutes, joins me. Nick, welcome back to the Morning Edition.
Great to be here.
Nick, your latest investigation tells the story of 4 women who allege they were subjected to sexual misconduct, to rape and to assault in the Australian Defence Force. Let's focus first on former Major Donna Manton. Tell us what happened to her.
Well, Donna is an incredible woman and an incredible servicewoman in that she's given more than 30 years of her life to the Defence Force. An officer who rose to the rank of Major. She's served in Afghanistan, Iraq, served with Special Forces Command, and yet a consistent part of her career has been enduring not just appalling sexual harassment, as a young officer in training, witnessing men masturbating to pornography in the rec room, having a more senior officer rubbing up against her as he touched himself. These are almost routine things she experiences as a younger officer. But as she gets older and climbs up the ranks, having serious cases of sexual assault in which she is the victim. In 2007, she was allegedly raped by a fellow Army officer. He's charged through the military justice system. Those charges result in a hung jury. That is, a divided jury of military peers. Some may have felt he was guilty, the accused man. Some may have felt he was not. Therefore, hung jury. Donna's asked by the military director of prosecutions, do you want to go again? We can retry this man. By this time, she was utterly traumatised, didn't want to be re-traumatised, and she also knew the accused man was facing unrelated sexual misconduct charges involving another woman. He was to be found guilty of them and kicked out of the Army, so he was gone. She didn't need to go through another trial process. All that said, he re-emerges as a defence contractor, and before long, he's back in the building. 2 points there. Number one, here she was exposed to a bloke the Army knew was no good. She wasn't told of that earlier investigation. Perhaps her alleged rape could have been avoided. And point number two, he leaves Army, booted out only to reappear within months as a defence contractor. He's back in the building. He gets a security clearance. What sort of message is that sending victims and other women? Jump forward to 2017. Donna is still with Defence. This time she's sexually assaulted by a colonel. That's a very, very senior rank, a Special Forces Command colonel, at a public event, a military reunion of her old classmates from Duntroon. He grasps her breasts. He dry humps her from behind. It's terrible graphic detail, yet it needs to be said because this is what she endured. There's fresh charges, another military justice trial. This time the man's found guilty and he's booted out of the Army. Two terrible incidents, a decade apart, experienced by an officer who I can tell you is a brave, powerful, articulate, a tremendous woman. If someone like that experiences that sort of conduct, what about the junior officer in a remote base or the junior soldier? And we tell those stories. We hear from those women as well.
One of the things that stood out to me in the episode is that Donna said that in some way she was relieved that people saw what the colonel allegedly did to her, that she saw that happened in public. Why was she relieved by that?
Well, the fact of the matter is, and we know this not just because of the individual experiences of women that we spoke to, but the Royal Commission has found that there has been a culture of prioritising the accused, their welfare, their career above victims, that there's been a culture of fear and silence. So if a woman speaks up about what the Royal Commission effectively determined has been an epidemic of sexual violence, if they speak up, it's their career that pays the price. And the perpetrator quite often does not face consequences. So Donna says, and it's a shocking thing to hear.
And I remember saying to one of my best friends was there with me, and I just said, what am I doing wrong? When does this stop? When can I go out for a drink with guys that I've known for 25, 30 years and not have to worry about being assaulted? I was just appalled. But the other realisation that I found really, really, really despairing was that I was so relieved that he'd done it in front of other people, because this time I'd be believed. It was better for me that my humiliation was public, because I'd be believed. That was my first thought.
I mean, what an indictment on the military. Again, this is involving an officer with other officers around. What chance does a young woman have out on that remote base in far north Queensland or the Northern Territory?
Yeah.
What chance does a young soldier, a trainee, have at Puckapunyal in Victoria? And the answer is not much.
You also spoke to Jordyn Gray, who was on her first posting as a flying officer at RAAF Tyndall in the Northern Territory in 2019. Talk us through her experience.
The power of Jordyn's story, I think, is twofold. Number one, we can compare it to Donna's experience. Donna's first alleged rape happens in 2007. The next incident, which is upheld, happens in 2017. Jordyn is a young officer, does her time at the Australian Defence Force Academy, is posted to RAAF base Tyndall. In 2020, mid-2020, she's allegedly raped at a party on base by another military colleague. So we're jumping forward in time, yet it's still happening to female officers. There's a trial. The trial leads to a verdict of not guilty. The prosecutor tells Jordyn at the time, listen, it doesn't mean innocent. It simply means we couldn't convince a jury of guilt. But I think for me, the real kicker in Jordyn's story is internal defence inquiries were utterly scathing of how she was treated after the alleged assault was reported to police and then after the alleged rapist was charged. Let me give you some examples. These internal inquiries say, how can it be that no one on base, including the commanding officer, thought it wasn't appropriate to move the accused rapist to a different base? Get this accused man, sure, he's entitled to a presumption of innocence, but get him away from the woman who says he raped me.
I mean, most members of the public would think that would be a given. That shouldn't even be in doubt. That shouldn't be something that's contested or even, their decision has to be made on that. That's extraordinary.
Absolutely. But both the Air Force internal inquiry plus the Inspector General of the Australian Defence Force found that it was the welfare of the accused that was, in their words, the paramount concern of the Air Force leaders on that base. The reports are scathing and they're shocking to read. It goes further, though. The reports say that the commanding officer of the squadron on base was second-guessing the judgments of the Northern Territory Director of Public Prosecutions, making up his own mind with bad legal advice from Air Force about whether the case would lead to charges. He thought it wouldn't, and that affected his decision to leave the accused man on base. The case did lead to charges, and of course it's the responsibility of the DPP, not a commanding officer in the Air Force, to decide whether charges should be laid or will be laid or not. So a plethora of significant failings that really go to the heart of the way victims are seen, treated, handled by their more superior colleagues.
Which is a incredibly important aspect of the story that you have published. Just before we get to those questions, I just wanted to ask you about the military court system, which does come up again and again in your reporting here. We rarely, if ever, find out what happens behind those closed doors, such as the level of secrecy. Tell us what you've learned about that system as part of your reporting here.
Well, it's not so much what I've learned. We can divine certain things from the case studies of these brave victim survivors, but the Royal Commission into Defence Suicide that concluded in September last year was utterly scathing of the military justice system, the way the military personnel system handles victims, the way the entire defence system not just handles victims, but handles the data that's produced when someone makes a complaint. Now think about this. This data, if used wisely, could allow the military, A, to identify alleged offenders, to understand where there's risks. Are there more risks in one certain base above another? Is there patterns of conduct? This sort of data is not being available. If it is, it's not being marshalled appropriately. So the military justice system, yes, it's a closed system. It's secretive. It involves military investigators and military juries. That's a jury of officer military peers that decide a person's guilt or otherwise. But the failings with that are compounded by other failings, which all produce a similar broad outcome for victims, which is, or has been, an unfair system, an unjust system, a system that often has prioritised the accused above the accuser and left women, and there are men who are victims in this, but mostly women, spat out, burnt out, and feeling like a place they called home, a career they loved, is no longer tenable. How can it be that victims who are brave enough to raise an allegation are the ones who pay often the ultimate career price simply for saying, listen, I was raped, I was allegedly assaulted? That shouldn't be the byproduct of raising such an allegation. Again, the foundation stone of all this reporting is this Royal Commission. Just months ago, its findings are utterly devastating. It says Defence has a systemic sexual violence problem, and unless there are significant reforms, that problem will continue and people will remain at risk. I mean, to read that report finished in late 2024, to read that in 2025 and to imagine that young women, middle-aged women, officers, non-commissioned officers, junior, senior, some are still at risk today is shocking.
So that Royal Commission report was handed down this year. You've read the report. My sense, regrettably, from that report was that it didn't have a huge cut-through in the media, in the public consciousness, and potentially, and possibly quite clearly, in the ADF. What elements of that report are most pressing? What needs to be done now to address reform, to get reform done that's clearly been identified in that report?
The report didn't cut through in the media landscape and possibly the political landscape. It landed with a hell of a thud, though, in the Defence Force because its conclusions are so damning they simply cannot be ignored. Now, I did interview the most senior woman in the military, Lieutenant General Fox. She's in charge of personnel, in charge of overseeing the cases in which women raise complaints. There's no doubt she is emotionally, viscerally affected by the report's findings.
I know the Australian Defence Force has failed quite a few people, and I am incredibly sorry that that has happened, but I am so committed, as are my colleagues, to making it right, to listen to the stories, to actually learn and make a difference.
She's a careerist. She spent over 35 years as a woman in the military. It's now her job to reform, to clean up the military. She certainly seems genuine and utterly up for undertaking that task. But it must also be said that the Royal Commission's findings are simply the latest in a long line of major inquiries that have utterly condemned defence and called out sexual violence. We go back to the Broderick report a decade plus ago, a report a decade before that, all saying there's a problem here, fix it. So if past major inquiries have not led to the necessary reform despite being utterly damning, why will this one be any different? So no wonder victims are sceptical, and no wonder we as the media have to keep a very close eye on the way that the reform process will unfold. What's the Albanese government doing today? They were supportive of the Royal Commission's many findings, including those findings in response to how victims of sexual violence can be better treated. A key inquiry recommendation, though, was for a new standalone inquiry into sexual violence. It might look like another Royal Commission. Ideally, victims would be heard, potentially heard in public. The Albanese government, some 10 months on from that recommendation being made, have not told the public, beyond supporting the general idea of an inquiry, who's going to lead it, when's it taking place, will victims be heard. Now, unless we start to get some real meat on the bone as to what the Albanese government is actually going to do, beyond saying recommendations look good, now we know there's a task force going behind the scenes, but unless we get some meat on the bone, and as time ticks past, not only do some people lose faith, victims have been burnt by a system they don't trust, but with every passing day, there's another woman in the Defence Force who remains at risk, and that's not good enough.
Now, Nick, many listeners will know you led the landmark reporting on other aspects of the ADF, most famously the case of Victoria Cross recipient Ben Roberts-Smith. What's your observation about what's gone wrong and what is still going wrong within the ADF leadership? Why has there not been change? Why has change not occurred at the pace that it needs to occur?
Both the war crime scandal, the Ben Roberts-Smith scandal, and the sexual violence scandal have a couple of things in common. Number one, they are only revealed because of brave ADF, be they soldiers, Air Force, Navy, people who did the right thing, who stood up and exposed war crimes, who saw things they didn't like and became whistleblowers or witnesses. In the case of women subjected to sexual violence, who had the courage to not just stand up and point a finger at their attacker, but to keep advocating to make the system a safer place for other women. So there are very, very decent, tremendous people, and I've had the utter privilege of meeting with them and telling their stories in the Defence Force. What are they up against? These institutions, or this big institution, the old expression about how difficult it is to turn around a container ship. Defence is slow to change. There is entrenched misogynistic cultures. The hierarchical structure, while utterly necessary, of course, for command and control, also produces a byproduct of power imbalance. And there is an inclination to secrecy, cover-up and reputational protection above sometimes all else. In that mix, achieving the change that is needed becomes extremely difficult. What is the solution? I mean, there's a whole range of policy solutions, but it begins with sunlight and accountability. And by that, unless we know what the problem is, we can't deal with it. So be it war crimes or sexual violence, let's hear about it. Let's talk about it. Let's give the victims or witnesses a platform to speak. Accountability means not just letting the light in, but holding people to account. I've read now in the last few weeks many internal reports detailing shocking, abysmal failings by commanders, by senior officers who have stuffed up the handling of rape cases. I mean, they're not accused of rape themselves, but when the victims come forward, have not provided a safe workplace, have done things that are utterly unacceptable in any workplace. They've been found to have acted in an unacceptable way. What happens to them? Nothing. In some cases, they're promoted. Unless there is accountability that victims can see, then nothing's going to change. And that accountability goes up the chain of command. So all well and good to say reform process is happening post the Royal Commission, all well and good to say reform is happening post the Brereton War Crimes Report. But who's been held to account? And can we see that accountability taking place in a tangible way, which provides community reassurance and Defence Force reassurance that things are changing?
And is our political class pushing the case for reform? I mean, the ADF may get serious about this if they are given a kick up the backside by the government of the day, which rarely, if ever, happens. So if you were sitting down with the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, now, or Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and you were telling them about the cases of these 4 women and what they reveal about the ADF, what would you say to them and what would you encourage them to do immediately?
Get cracking. I mean, I think what this government should be doing yesterday is telling the public and telling the defence community what reforms they are implementing right now, how they're implementing them. Let's go to a critical area here which comes up time and time again. Data. Cases. Defence needs to know data and cases involving sexual violence. There needs to be a public accountability, so let's publish the figures around incidents, when they're happening, where they're happening, how they're being handled. if we start doing that, not only is there that sunlight disinfectant, but we can be assured there is no longer convicted sex felons, people convicted of sexual offences in the Army or other services today. Let me explain what I mean by that. The Royal Commission said in September last year, we don't know if Defence has the data about who with sexual convictions, so people convicted of sexual offending, still is employed in Defence today. We are not sure if Defence has that data. Therefore, they don't know if there's rapists within their ranks, to put it like that. So the government needs to be saying, right, go and get the data if you don't have it. If you do have it, use it. How's it being used? Tangible reforms explained publicly. The government needs yesterday to have said to the public and the defence community, right, this standalone inquiry into sexual violence, it's headed by this former judge or this former general, these experts. It's going to be public. It's going to be victim-informed. We're going to hear from victims, and this is where it's going to be held. And some of the hearings will be televised. I mean, that's accountability in action. We've heard none of that. In its defence, the Albanese government and defence hierarchy say there's a task force that's multi-agency across government, involves policy, legislative change, resourcing implications, etc., etc. Well and good, but every day that goes past again is a day that a woman is exposed potentially to sexual violence in the military. And every day that happens is a day that shouldn't happen.
Nick, you said earlier that a lot of this reporting happens because of brave whistleblowers, and I completely agree and thank them, but it also happens because of courageous, fierce journalists like yourself. So thank you for your work on this, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.